Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining our September E-Vroom Zoom. My name is Carla Walker. I'm the Climate Advisor for the City of Cincinnati. And I want to introduce my colleague, Jennifer Zavon, who has just recently joined our EV Cincy team. Jennifer?
Thanks, Carla. My name is Jennifer Zavon. I'm a public ally with the City of Cincinnati Office of Environment and Sustainability. So Public Allies is an AmeriCorps program, and I'm going to be serving a 10-month term with OES through that program. So I am really excited to working with Carla on EV Cincy and getting involved in all of the other ways that Cincinnati is trying to become more sustainable.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. If you could go ahead and stop screen share. Today's event is part of our week-long celebration of EVs and part of EV Cincy Week, which is our nod to National Drive Electric Week. And we're talking about what we are calling the EV charging renaissance happening here in Cincinnati. And I say that, and I use that term because there really is a lot of interesting movement around building the charging infrastructure here in Cincinnati. And we've seen it even in just the short while that EV Cincy has been around for the last year. Through the American Cities Climate Challenge, the city is focusing on adding chargers to our region. We have a goal of about 162 that we're trying to put into the region. And that's not just through the government, like through City of Cincinnati, but actually working in partnership with some of our other institutions and encouraging our corporate sector and work sites to put charging on their sites. But our guests today are really adding to that charging portfolio here in Cincinnati, and they're one of the major resources in this area for chargers and that technology. And I'll introduce them in just a bit, but just a few housekeeping notes. So we want to give a shout out to our repeat Zoomers. But if this is your first time joining us, these events are kind of a mashup between a webinar, a Zoom meeting, and a podcast. So they're designed to engage the audience. So we ask that you keep your video and your cameras switched on. We'll have our guests present their slide decks. We'll jump into a short interview with them. And then we'll have a facilitated Q&A with you. So please drop your questions and comments into the chat box as they're speaking. While we want this to be engaging and lively, we also want to make sure you can hear. So once we welcome our guests, please be kind and mute your microphones. With that, I want to introduce our heavy hitter group for today's event from Electrada, Flow, and Findlay Market. First, we have Kevin Kushman, who's the CEO of Electrada. Kevin's 20 plus years in the energy technology and utility space includes CEO and CFO roles with energy tech software firms such as Integral Analytics, Blue Pillar, and Current Group, founding leadership of Synergy Ventures, $200 million corporate venture fund, and co-founder of CleanBridge Energy Partners. We have Irina Filippova, Electrada's COO. Irina has been an advocate for sustainability since launching BP's high-profile Helios House in Los Angeles in 2007. She brings over 20 years of experience driving transformational change in the energy sector in both corporate and entrepreneurial settings. While at BP, Irina worked on conventional and renewable energy portfolios in upstream and downstream segments, and subsequently served as investments director of a solar asset management fund. We have Brookes Shean, who is the general manager for USA East and Central Canada for Flow. Flow is the technology partner of Electrada. And Brookes has more than 15 years of experience in product management in the fields of new technologies and digital environments. He's also worked with cloud-based products and services as well as fiber optics. He started his career at Burlington Hydro before transitioning to fiber-wired Burlington Hydro Communications, which was the company's Telecommunications Division, and later selling this asset to Cogeco Cable. He's an avid driver, now converted to electric mobility, and Brookes travels more than twice the daily commute average, which allows him to fully understand and experience the realities of EV drivers, as well as educate the public on the benefits of driving electric. Finally, we have Joe Hansbauer, who's the president and CEO of the Corporation for Findlay Market. He has spent the last 7 years supporting small businesses at the market, building entrepreneurship programs, and ensuring that the market continues to be an inclusive, dynamic gathering place in the heart of our Over the Ride. So let's give them all a very warm E-Vroom Zoom welcome. I'll turn it over to you guys to share screens.
Thank you, Carla, and please let me know if that's showing up okay on everyone's screen. Excellent. Well, thank you, first of all, to Carla and team, Jennifer, for including us in EV Cincy Week. We're very excited to be part of this as our inaugural week as a participant in the region, and hopefully for many years to come. So we're grateful for the chance to be with you today. So I'll spend a little time introducing what we're doing at Electrada, what we're about, how we're a little bit different in terms of EV charging infrastructure, and what we hope to be in terms of a catalyst for our region as we move up the scales for EV adoption and promote clean mobility more broadly in Cincinnati and around the Midwest. So first of all, our mission, very plainly stated, is to build the region's highest performance EV charging network. What does that mean? Does that mean we don't have any EV charging, or where does that position Electrada? We're actually a unique animal. We're coming out of a time in development in this part of the country for EV infrastructure, where it's primarily been early adopter or best efforts opportunities or grant funded charging that's come into place at higher visibility locations to more or less say, hey, here's some EV charging, recognize the fact that drivers are starting to show up on the landscape, Teslas and the Bolts and the Leafs and so forth, but really more from an awareness perspective. We believe at this point, and our investors backed us for this reason, that the industry is turning a corner from the early adopter stage to the commercialization stage, where more viable business models are available. There will be many more vehicles on the market, many more drivers on the market, and the use cases will continue to expand. And ultimately, the infrastructure currently isn't and won't be keeping up with demand unless new models are provided to the EV driver communities. So that's really what Electrada is about. So we're focused on this region, and we're focused on this region primarily because the cities in this region, Cincinnati being one, and our core as our headquarters city, suffers from an underdevelopment of EV infrastructure to promote new drivers to adopt the technology, but also to serve what we believe to be a conversion of EV electric mobility coming into corporate use cases, municipals, fleets, and others who are looking to change over from internal combustion engine vehicles. Our model is also a slightly different approach. We don't sell equipment. We don't sell networking services. We actually build, own, operate, and maintain a portfolio of EV charging infrastructure, and it's a slightly different approach. We're trying to remove the risk process from a currently very friction-laden approach to find ways to have site hosts deploy EV charging at their locations, and Irina will spend a little more time talking about that. And finally, what's very important to us in building out what we call a portfolio of depth in our region, not just about the low-hanging fruit, but it's really about connecting folks to new clean transportation methodologies for their daily lives, but also touching areas of the community that typically are on the very back end of adoption of new technologies. And equity in clean transportation is a big deal to us as a community partner. And in so doing, we actually have committed to deploying this year one implementation with a social services partner, and then going forward each year, at least 2 clean EV charging stations for partners that provide community service and for which transportation is typically an expense barrier to creating and delivering their missions. So we believe that all parts of our community, not just the Tesla drivers, are entitled to see clean transportation as something within reach. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Irina to describe our model.
Thank you, Kevin. So to recap what Kevin was already saying, our model is actually quite simple, and it stands on those three legs. The first one is that we take all the capital risk in deploying EV charging infrastructure, because we believe that primarily due to the fact that charging infrastructure is expensive, it has been an impediment to EV adoption, a widespread EV adoption, not only in Cincinnati, but anywhere in the world. So we take all that capital costs, all the installation costs, all the equipment, networking costs on ourselves. We do not burden the site hosts with those costs. Not only that, we continue to maintain the network that we own, the deployed network that we own, and ensure that we're always there to support our EV drivers. In addition to that, what we offer to our site host partners is a way of sharing in that economic success as charger utilization begins to really pick up pace. So as EV drivers begin to use our chargers, we actually share a portion of our net revenues with the site hosts. So we feel that that's a way to really partner and to bring everybody along on the journey. It's obviously very, very important that the infrastructure, once installed, is functioning. It's fully functioning. And if there's any issue whatsoever, and Brookes will talk a little bit about the technology aspect of this in a minute, but that any aspect of the EV driver experience is literally thought through from start to finish. We've heard lots and lots of horror stories from EV drivers, especially those who aren't relying on the Tesla supercharger network, that they've had lots of issues using the chargers that were there and even were showing up as functioning. So we're here to really make sure that that uptime is guaranteed and ensured both on the hardware and on the network, and that there is a very straightforward way of troubleshooting on a 24/7, 365 basis. So the EV driver is really our focus as a service-oriented company. And finally, this maintenance and support. Again, if we were a company based out of California or New York, we probably would not be in a position to easily support our site hosts and EV drivers locally. But because we're a local company and our focus is entirely on ensuring that the infrastructure in our region is developed, deployed, and maintained, we're here to make sure that we can respond sort of at a moment's notice when either EV drivers or site hosts experience any kind of an issue or require support. So those are the three pillars of the business, and Kevin will talk a little bit more about the greater ecosystem within which that business sits.
Thanks very much, Irina. So when we started putting this business together, an emerging infrastructure business, it's kind of an anomaly, we were spending time with our prospective investors, all of whom, incidentally, are Southwest Ohio residents. So we have a strong core foundation of belief behind what we're showing you here. We started with this end in mind. And what is the end? The end is an ecosystem in this part of the country, specifically in Cincinnati, where you have all the attributes of what should be a sustainable, clean mobility transition in place. So it's not just the things that you know are happening down at the bottom left with the electric vehicle manufacturers coming into the market with new platforms and new models over the next 3 or 4 years, creating really a captured demand for EV charging, but it's also the support infrastructure, the networking that folks like Carla and Jennifer and the team have built around, and the EV driver community have built around wanting to see opportunities for charging to come into places where they live, work, play, and spend time. So that's really where we start talking about working with site hosts as partners, not just as real estate to park infrastructure on. This is really how do we create a multi-pronged approach to clean mobility in our city. So we felt like the drivers are here, the vehicles are showing up, we have a community support infrastructure in place. What we're looking for now is a capital catalyst to come in and make these investments, remove risk from folks who would like to see more of this occurring in different places in the community, and allow for that adoption curve to accelerate as quickly as possible, which is really where Electrada and Flow met up. And I'll turn it over to Brookes to describe a little bit more about what Flow does and why we connected in this opportunity. But as you look at this ecosystem, we think every productive and successful, sustainable approach to clean mobility in a municipal environment should start with these pillars. So in that sense, we provided this as a well-rounded approach. So our investors would feel comfortable, and so folks in the EV community would recognize we're here for the long haul. This is something we're doing for our region, and we hope that we'll be seeing you at our sites as they come on board. Brookes, it's all yours.
Thanks, Kevin. If you can go to the next slide. Thanks for having me, everyone. Kevin mentioned about that adoption curve and that acceleration, right? And what we wanted to showcase here is that U.S. passenger EV sales forecast has been going up and up and up. Sure, it did slow down from the COVID-19 impact that we've suffered since March. But what we're actually seeing now is getting back into pre-pandemic numbers, and the growth continues. So a key important part is in the next 5 years in seeing that growth trajectory, right? When we look at Cincinnati's numbers right now from an EV charging perspective, they are considered lower, but this shows that it's at a perfectly right time with what Electrada is doing and what Flow are doing in partnering together in getting ahead of that curve and ensuring that stations and reliable infrastructure are in the ground when all of that adoption happens, and you're completely ready to take all those EVs into the market throughout Ohio and provide a really, really great user experience. So really what we're seeing is Cincinnati is really becoming poised for that strong giant step that it takes to help that electrification and the movement into EV purchasing for every type of everyday consumer. If we go to the next slide, Kevin. So what we've learned over the last 10 years is EV charging infrastructure is a good way to support greater EV adoption. But the most important thing, as Kevin and Irina have alluded to, is providing infrastructure with the best quality of service in mind. So that's built-in reliability and high uptime is the best way to accelerate EV adoption. And this is where our partnership together really, really flourishes from our uptime perspective, from Electrada's mission and their funding behind them, like Kevin mentioned with that private investment funding. This will really put Cincinnati and Ohio on the map of having one of the best, most reliable charging networks in North America right at your doorsteps. And this partnership is definitely going to deliver that. Next slide. So our mission as an EV charging station manufacturer and network operator, we have been around since 2009. So our mission is really to accelerate EV adoption by offering the best charging experience to our customers. So our customers like Electrada, our customers like EV drivers, because they are a Flow member in the greater network ecosystem, and also the site hosts and owner operators. And we believe that best charging experience to customers really starts with the high quality aspect that we design into our products, and also from how we support the overall network and ensuring that when you're going to a charging station, either out in a public area or at a mixed use multi-residential area or at a workplace, that charging station is going to be working when you're getting there, so you can rely on the charge to actually get you from point A to point B to point C in your journey. Next slide. So how we get there and how we deliver it, and really where a lot of our really great partnership with Electrada and Flow came is in our DNA. We deliver really, really high uptime. So this is actually from a hardware level as well as a network level. Having 99% plus uptime on level 2 and 97% uptime on DC fast charging is almost unheard of, next to how Kevin and Irina alluded to on that Tesla charging network. So this is the type of uptime that we'll be bringing and standing behind for the Cincinnati market and through the Electrada partnership. Our satisfaction from a customer satisfaction and a CSAT score, we also take into full account. So from a support perspective, as new EV drivers and as drivers are actually adopting this technology, we have a 24/7 customer support network and care team that can answer any questions that you may have, even right down to our #1 call driver right now, which is, I just picked up my car the other day. I have no idea where the charge port is on my vehicle. How do I charge this thing? Where do I connect into? So our full training session that way with EV drivers and our customers really helps with that overall hand-holding approach in making sure that this transition to electrification is such a great experience, right? Overall, as Flow, just a little bit of background further on what we are and who we are. We have 30,000 stations in the ground across North America. They are manufactured in North America, primarily here in Canada, where I'm based, but sold throughout Canada and the United States. We support over 500,000 monthly charging sessions on our network. That basically is on a monthly perspective. That translates to about 7.5 gigawatts of energy transferred on a monthly basis, which is translating to about just over 26 million miles traveled per month. So a lot of different trips around the earth, right? Over 1,000 trips around the earth based on what we're providing as far as our charging infrastructure goes. That's my contact. If you have any questions, we follow up, and I'll hand it over to, I think, Joe now from Findlay.
Great, thank you. You can slip over to the next slide. So here at Market, and hopefully many of you have visited us at Market, if not over the last 6 months during the pandemic, certainly over the last couple of years. We are really, really excited to be partnering with Flow and Electrada for basically everything that they just described, right? So we have a commitment as a responsibility perspective of stewards of this thriving landmark to make sure that we're creating a greener, more sustainable future. You know, with our small business and kind of farmer connection here, you know, certainly a greener future is important to us, so that we can continue the green support and infrastructure that we've seen over the last century and a half. What I will say from our experience with EV, what we know is that we are not the experts and are not going to be the experts on new infrastructure, new technologies, and in particular in this case, EV charging, right? Whether it's the type of stations that we should have there or how to keep them up and running. And over the last several years, and maybe some of you have experienced it, that has been significantly challenging for us as we have tried to make that infrastructure possible, but not being able to have the uptime or availability of that product that we would like. So, you know, we've been in a process of trying to figure out how to bring that back to market, and that's when Electrada kind of entered the picture and took all of the questions out of the frame and allowed us to make it happen really, really easy, right? We didn't have to figure out the financial resources or the capital stack or what stations needed to be there or how to support it or how to do any of that, right? We just needed to make sure that there was a parking space available for it. And so that's where we're at now. You know, we have 1.2 million visitors each year that come and visit us at the market. Many of those are coming to the market with EV vehicles, and we want to make that easier. We want to attract those customers to the market. We want, you know, if we can make it not only a service that we provide when we're here, but we use it to attract new customers or repeat customers to the market because it is easy and convenient. That's what we're focused on. And we couldn't be more excited to be celebrating the grand opening and cutting the ribbon on this later this week to make that once again available to our customers. I think that's it for me.
Great.
Thank you. Back to you, Carla.
Fantastic, you guys. Thank you so much. We're going to jump into a little bit of an interview here and chat a bit. Would be great for everyone to throw their videos on as we dive into this interactive part of our event. First, Kevin and Kevin and Irina, I want to throw this out to you. I usually send this to all of our guests. It's usually the first question, and it's kind of give us a sense of what got you interested in electric vehicles?
Well,
Well, I can start, and I'll let Irina jump in as well. I've been around energy technology for a couple of decades now, and most recently working with utilities and energy companies, and even Tesla out in California, Hawaii, and the Northwest, recognizing that this wasn't just a toe dip. This is happening. The change, the much ballyhooed change to clean mobility over the last 10 years is actually coming into focus. All the commitments coming into place. Being an EV driver myself, and recognizing that, I'm in a different situation than, 40% of the market does not have the ability to charge at home. They may live in apartment complexes or condos or places where they don't have the ability to charge their vehicles. So starting to see all these forces moving at scale to create a market meant for us that being part of it was something we couldn't ignore anymore, especially in this part of the country where we spend a lot of time waiting for technology to seep its way in from the coasts. And from our perspective, it's time to start pushing technology and at least our model out from here and let Cincinnati be recognized as a sustainable transportation hub, especially with everything going on in this state with Workhorse and Lordstown and the battery plants coming online. This should be recognized as part of the solution early on instead of just a recipient of technology that others take the time to develop. Irina?
Great. Well, I'll share my story, which probably is similar to some of the other people's stories. I started driving a hybrid vehicle back in 2007 when I came to Los Angeles for a alternative energy project with BP. And that was a great experience compared to an internal combustion engine car. It was very quiet. I barely ever had to charge it. And I thought, well, why doesn't everybody drive a hybrid? This was, remember, 2007. This was the beginning of the sustainability/green revolution in Hollywood and elsewhere. And then I visited the very first Tesla store in LA back in the day, and it just blew me away. The elegance of that vehicle, the simplicity of it, the maintenance around it, and how little of it was required. All of it just spoke volumes to the future of mobility and electric vehicles. So I think I got hooked back then, and now seeing this wave really cresting and picking up speed, and seeing how from every direction, from all the commitments, from major automobile manufacturers, from even oil and gas companies like my former employer BP, the commitment to actually bring electric vehicles and charging infrastructure onto the market. It's a very exciting segment to be part of. So that's my story.
Yeah, I love the way that both of you all talk about the opportunity that Cincinnati and Ohio has for really expanding in this market. Toe dip, I'm going to have to use that. I would definitely say this is not just a toe dip. This is definitely happening. Joe, I'd love to ask you about Findlay Market, which is actually one of my favorite places here in the city, but it's an iconic cultural institution here. It's a historic location. Yesterday we had another one of our iconic institutions speak with us about their pathway to charging. And I wonder if you could share from your perspective, what are some lessons learned that you would share with other cultural institutions that we want to bring into this space and build out charging with us?
For sure. No, I think, in Market, I think certainly is interesting in its history and traditions, if you will. So I think one of the both assets as well as liabilities of the market is that it is slow to adopt change, right? It is on the good side of that, right? Findlay Market literally, I don't think would be here for us to all enjoy and celebrate today if it was fast to change, right? Over the last century or so, as we moved to big box stores and things moved to the suburbs, and there was a different way to do business. If there wasn't a stubbornness to change, we would have shut the doors and not reopened them probably sometime in the late 1970s, right? But that stubbornness to change, to continue to do it the way that we've been doing it, to support the small business and the small farmer, and create connections with neighbors, and have an experience that's much more than just getting your commodity grocery items, is what makes Findlay Market so unique. That being said, right, as we try to make or adopt changes here at the market, whether that is anything from new businesses or different hours of operation, or putting in parking spaces that are restricted and available only to electric vehicles, there is naturally comes with that a resistance in some ways to that change. So often what we look at is trying to communicate how the new and the forward-looking can support the existing infrastructure, right? And certainly for us, this is about attracting new customers to the market that maybe not already experienced market shoppers, because they pop onto the app and they see that there's a charging station. Well, okay, let's take my electric vehicle to that space and we'll wander around for 30 minutes while it charges. And hopefully while they're there waiting for their car to charge, we can introduce them to what is many of you know as a great and exciting space. But then for those that are regular customers, right, if we want to make sure that we're not leaving barriers in place, right, if you can't come to the market and do your shopping and get home because you don't have a way to charge your vehicle, we want to make sure that we're removing those. So the combination of kind of removing barriers, but also being innovative, and the way that we attract new customers is kind of the way that we position changes like this.
Great. I'm so glad to see the evolution, the continuous evolution of Findlay Market, and that it's still there. Thank you for that, and thanks for working with Electrada on this. Hey, Brookes, I'm going to ask you this question because we've been talking about this for EV Cincy Week. We really are using this as an opportunity for not only to showcase what we're doing in Cincinnati, but to kind of get a sense of where does Cincinnati fall with respect to how it's doing on EV charging and just becoming more EV friendly with other cities. And since your role kind of has you working with a lot of municipalities across the country, I'd be curious to know if there's anything other cities are doing that we could steal from to kind of like, I don't know, supercharge this adoption curve for Cincinnati. We're getting there, but you know, just as Joe said, Cincinnati is slow to change. But are there examples from other cities we could learn from?
Yeah, I think one of the cities that comes to mind is actually based here in Canada, City of Kingston. City of Kingston is usually a bypass city. It's a university city town, but people a lot of times bypass it on our major highway. But their downtown is super amazing for local restaurants and small businesses and the mom and pop shops. And when they deployed infrastructure with us, both DCFCs and level 2s, like Electrada is going to be doing in Cincinnati, having the chargers appear on many different maps and in vehicle mapping software and showcasing those as you're planning your journey out started to drive people off of the highway and down into the city corridors to take advantage of charging for like an hour and a half to 4 hours in many cases, and also shopping locally. So that full community aspect brings in a different kind of thought pattern. Where that won't work is if the network is not reliable. So if an individual is driving through and they go and they try to connect in and the charger's not working, they typically won't go back. Again, they'll bypass it, right? So that education of uptime and quality, like the three of us have been talking about, Irina, Kevin, and myself, is super important for that adoption side. But it's definitely, Cincinnati, I wouldn't say is behind, right? Because you saw the trajectory of the increases in EV vehicles, right? Part of it is OEM stock availability, right? And adoption. Other pieces are state funding and local funding for offsetting this piece. But with the way that Electrada has set up their business plan and are deploying infrastructure in different ways than most of the US and Canada and North America have seen, you'll start to see EV adoption increase because the stations are there and now you can rely on them in many different ways to charge the vehicle. And that's a lot of times the hesitation to EV adoption is, how am I actually going to charge this thing when I'm not really in an area to be able to charge?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of that. We've had a lot of those questions come up in something similar, and similar comments come up in previous E-Vroom Zooms. I'm going to open up our Q&A and do this facilitated conversation with the folks on the in the event here. Thanks, you guys, for dropping your questions and your comments in. Let me first go to H. Taylor. It doesn't give me your first name, and I apologize for that. Can you pop on the screen here? You were asking a question about how it's great that the EV chargers are placed in different locations, but what should we expect in terms of turnaround time if a charger is down? Do you want to kind of speak to that? Hopefully you're still here.
I think we could probably take that. Yeah. Kevin, go. Do you want to go ahead?
I'll give it a shot, and obviously Brookes could answer more directly as our technology partner, but ultimately the goal here is, and we work on this with every one of our host partners as Electrada, our site agreement with them includes a service level agreement, which not just says, hey, we'll do our best to try to keep this open and operating, but it actually has financial hooks to it that ensure that the infrastructure is operable and accessible to drivers under the agreement. So we treat this as if we're Amazon Web Services or Microsoft in providing you hosting agreements for network access. This is a service that should be up and operable. It is a digital electric appliance and has the ability to be diagnosed remotely, upgraded remotely. So we take that seriously. And from our perspective, that's really one of the real reasons why anyone would allow a group like ours to come and co-develop charging with them as a site partner, is to make sure that this is not an eyesore, it's not abandoned, it's something you're proud to have at your facility as an amenity. But I'll turn it over to Brookes for any thoughts you have as well, Brookes.
Yeah, I think maybe you've been kind of burned in the past of going to a location where there has been a charging that you were expecting to be working and is not. That's actually what I find personally when I talk to people is the number one barrier to them buying an EV. It's not necessarily the distance that they can travel. Within about 30 days of actually acquiring an EV, the distance issue goes away, and it's more of when I'm in public or going to work or going to my multi-residential building, is the charger going to be up or is it going to be down? And that's what we obsess over, right, is that uptime perspective. So we're constantly monitoring the network. We have a 24/7 team that's constantly monitoring our network, and we can do little different tweaks into stations if we're seeing issues. The other thing is the modularity of the solution. So what you may see in your areas sometimes, let's say, is two charging connectors connected to the same station, same screen. What you'll notice once you start seeing the Electrada Flow chargers is every charger is separated, or it's on its own unique interface. That ensures that if there is an issue, it's really isolated to only one, so singular instead of multiple. So there's a lot of different things that we've designed into our ecosystem to prevent issues like you may have experienced in field today.
Okay, great. Denise, are you still on the line? You have a question about the apps.
Yes, Plug-in America has a nice software where they show where chargers are, how many chargers at a location, and if they're in use. But it seems like it doesn't come to Ohio. Like if you put in a zip code in California, it pops up. Is there any and Plug-in America is a not-for-profit organization. They've been around a long time. Is there any software like that around here for all different cars, all different chargers? And is Electrada doing anything like that?
Sure, Denise. Thanks for your question. Very important. So from my understanding, Plug in America and PlugStar that they use actually feeds off the PlugShare network. And PlugShare is the go-to network for all charging that come from any brand, really. This is the most comprehensive network. So Flow Network has a direct APP with PlugShare. So the moment a Flow charger goes live on a network, it's visible not just on the Flow network, but also on PlugShare, where you can also leave reviews, and this is what a lot of EV drivers use. So it's definitely part of our ecosystem. There's also the US Department of Energy website, AFDC, that shows chargers everywhere in the United States, and you will see Flow chargers there as well. Brookes, anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you've definitely hit it. Everything is in real time too, or pretty much within like 30 seconds of updates. So in PlugShare, typically a user has to manually check into the charger to say that they're there. On our integration with PlugShare, as soon as the vehicle connects, the status change to in use. Okay, when they unconnect, it changes to not in use and available. Same thing happens with the Flow app. And then as partnerships build in this industry, you'll hear a lot about roaming agreements. So like competitive networks, Flow, ChargePoint, Greenlots, and others, we all might be competitors, but we're actually working together to make EV drivers' lives more seamless and simple. So if you prefer the ChargePoint app, let's say, you can activate a Flow charger and pay just like you would through your ChargePoint app on the Flow network and vice versa. So Flow to ChargePoint as well. So all of that universal kind of interconnection between all the networks is actually happening in an ongoing fashion, again, to make everything simpler for the EV driver.
Cool, cool. I'm gonna jump to Ron Mosby. Hey, Ron, it's good to see you.
Hey, Carla, how are you?
I'm doing great. Haven't seen you in a while.
I know.
Thanks for joining us. You've got a couple of really good questions in the chat box, so I want you to go ahead and pose those to the group. There's a couple of different things that you're asking, and one of them in particular related to the educational institutions. We've not had a conversation about that yet with EV Cincy, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, great, thank you. And so I guess this question is really directed to Brookes, since I know that you're with the Flow Network. Do you have EV charging stations located on school properties anywhere in the United States or North America?
In Canada, primarily, we do in schools. I would say definitely more of the early adopters from a school side has been colleges, universities, not so much high school and public school sides of things. And then we also do have private school as well. So in those systems and more the private side of things, a lot of times it's servicing the on-field fleet, okay, of the parking bylaws and those type of pieces, and then also powering the teachers and students. So one of them would be Haverford College that has our infrastructure that's providing it to both teachers and students. Okay,
so then that would really be more the secondary education as opposed to the primary education.
That's right. Yeah,
okay.
That's right.
Okay. I think I did have another question. I was just curious, and Kevin, you could probably help with this one. What is the average life of a charge, both in terms of time and mileage?
So that's a great question, because the answer is it depends. So you caught off base on this one. I think as everyone on the EV driver community on the call knows, that it depends on the capacity of the charger. It depends on the battery in the vehicle itself, how big the battery is, how much charge it can take in its own battery management system. And in terms of how much time it takes, it's a function of all of those. So I'll say in general, a level 2 charger should be able to deliver somewhere between 20 and 30 miles per hour in terms of charge. And a direct current fast charger would deliver a multiple of that, could be 100 miles per hour in terms of charge, depending on where it sits in that range of capacity, from 50 kilowatt hour to 150, 200 kilowatt hour capacity chargers. So the goal with our strategy generally is, with primarily level 2s, is to provide charging where folks will likely be parked for greater than an hour. So it's worth the time to get out of your car, plug in, spend some time doing something either at work, at your residence overnight, or at an attraction or an amenity such as Findlay Market, and come back and have a substantial charge in your vehicle, at least compensating for your daily commute mileage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And I guess I don't know if I did this intentionally or not, but it does seem that this kind of works out. So I think my last question, Carla, would really be probably more directed to Irina, but I wanted to follow up on Carla's question. And just from your own perspective, do you think that our current road system is actually an impediment to adopting EVs in this region?
Well, that's a great question, Ron. A very 30,000 foot kind of a question. We certainly are in the transition period right now, from the standpoint of changing behaviors and changing modalities of everyday life. Our vision for an EV driver, from the EV driver's perspective, is that charging is wherever the car is parked. Charging does not involve going out of your way to a fueling station to fuel up your vehicle, as it's happening now. And so as you're seeing this transition happening little by little, step by step, for example, oil and gas companies are now deploying EV charging at their forecourts, right, at their fueling stations. That is legacy, and that legacy will go away, with the great exception, obviously, of interstate charging, right? Because you still need that stopover to quickly stop and charge, usually at the DC fast charger, to then get back on the road. But from the overall kind of holistic life ecosystem perspective, charging will happen wherever the car is. It will not require for the driver to go out of their way to charge. Oftentimes people ask, what do these EV chargers look like? Actually, it's a very simple and small piece of machinery. It's not an impediment to parking. It's not an impediment to driving. It doesn't require a whole lot of infrastructure, but it does require being near an electrical panel. So the closer you are to the power source, the better. So from that standpoint, the entire urban landscape architecture will be changing to adjust. And we're already seeing that in a lot of great projects that are out there to build kind of new spaces, new functional spaces to live and work, and how that may be optimized for EV driving. So that is already on the way, but obviously it will take some time. And as we are progressing on this journey, we're here to make sure that for today's driver, for today's resident, for today's employee, for today's shopper, that EV charging infrastructure is there to support them as they adopt electric vehicles.
Cool. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that was a really good question, Ron, as we're really trying to build out EV charging infrastructure here through the city. And through OES and the work that we're doing. I've got a question for Electrada and Findlay Market. And this is from H. Taylor. I'm going to ask both of his questions. The first, and I've wondered this as well, did Electrada find the market, or did the market find Electrada? And I ask that because H asks this question of, is there a way that Electrada, with what you guys are saying, which sounds amazing, is there a way that Electrada can pair with or get connected to the businesses, or are you already doing that? Is there a one-pager? This is what the question is. Is there a one-pager that can be sent to maybe, let's say, the chambers of commerces or other business groups so that they can know what you all are doing and start, maybe that's a way to jumpstart this connectivity? Curious.
So great questions, all interwoven. And I think the first answer is about the market specifically, and it applies to a lot of what we would call, not in derogatory sense, brownfield opportunities in our region, which are places where chargers existed for the last few years, which may have been underutilized or dysfunctional. So we looked across the region as we were starting to build new greenfield opportunities with corporates and communities, but we also came across Findlay. We knew that was, as a driver, I knew that one wasn't operable, and there are others in the region like that. So we said, hey, let's start by having this conversation, can we refresh this opportunity for the market? Can we turn it from what is potentially negative equity in the eyes of the EV driving community here regionally into something positive and start that refresh process? So in that case, we do almost everything we do is origination based. So in terms of having a one-pager or content, we have a website, we have some things we can send around, and we're doing a lot of outreach individually with our team and through our board and our friends in the community that way. If there's any content that we can provide, please feel free to reach out to us directly, and we're happy to provide as much as needed to get a conversation started, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Part of that question?
That's great. Thank you. H is also wondering if we had talked about PlugShare. Do you guys have dedicated staff monitoring that app to look for any potential EV charger issues?
That's the cool part about having a technology partner that's completely integrated vertically, hardware, software, and system. The communication is automated, so alarms are recognized 24/7, 365, and they're either upgraded or diagnosed and addressed remotely. Or if there's some need for a physical visit, a truck roll, somebody ran into the charger or something's broken physically, we have local partners here that both install as well as maintain the infrastructure. So behind the scenes, we have a ticketing system that will kick off a truck roll if that's necessary and we can't complete a fix over the air, essentially. And in that sense, PlugShare is not just a source of opportunities for us on the investment side, it's also a way to make sure that there's general satisfaction in the driving community with what we're about to do.
Great, thank you. We've got a question coming also from Daniel. Daniel, are you unmuted? If you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, my question was around the kilowatt hour rate for charging, and what is the time frame for recouping your installation costs? I know as an EV driver, one of the biggest issues I run into with level 2 charging is the fact that it tends to be much higher than my at-home rate. I'm paying 4.9 cents per kilowatt hour at a home rate, and you can pay multiples of that when you go to a level 2 charger. So do you try to aggressively recoup your installation costs up front, or do you have a longer term view of it, and do you try to do it gradually over a longer time frame?
Fantastic question. You would have loved this in part of our, as we were going out and pitching to investors originally, how do you actually make a business out of charging for charging? And how do you compete with 5 cents a kilowatt hour at home? And part of the answer is there are a lot of folks that can't charge at home, first of all. And secondly, there is a convenience factor, and what we spend a lot of time on is segmentation. So workplace, community, fleet, attractions, and segment each one of those locations, create what we call a load profile for those locations. And based on that charging profile, that helps to filter out what we think the average cost per kilowatt hour should be for the average session duration. Once we've done all that math and those analytics, we assign a price. So in the sense of Findlay Market, 30 cents a kilowatt hour, which again is true, is a multiple of what you pay at home. But again, there's a value for that in having it where you're going to be parked. And in the sense that you can't go home and get a full charge at home, that is a value that comes with some level of a premium. We also know that in the market, there are 49 cents a kilowatt hour chargers for level 2 charging in certain places. So it's still in this almost Wild West environment. Our goal is to always maintain this view of what is the comparable cost per mile to an ICE vehicle in terms of fueling, and come in just at or below that so we can maintain that price parity conversation. And if we need to start looking at discounting or if the use case changes, we'll adjust pricing. And that's the value of looking at this in a long-term 10-year investment horizon. So back to your question about recouping investment. We're not looking to recoup the investment in the first year. There's no way that would be possible with EV adoption where it is now. The sweet spot for us in the curve will be years 4 through 7, honestly, when adoption and use cases and ubiquity of charging actually squeezes out that range of pricing to something that everybody recognizes, and it will be completely transparent to the driver.
Great. I have one question in here from Dick and Carol. Is it French?
Fensel.
Fensel. Okay, great. Go ahead and ask your question. Thanks, you guys, for joining.
We are living in a high-rise condo, and we're wondering if Electrada has had any experience in terms of dealing with putting up stations where you have a large number of people who want to use them, and if you do it, whether you're doing the level 2 stations or the fast charging ones, because people, there'd be a number of people who'd be wanting to use it, but not every single car is going to have its own station.
Thank you for that question, Dick and Carol. Great question, very relevant. Obviously, residential charging is our #1 priority. As Kevin has mentioned earlier, some 40% of Cincinnati residents live in multi-unit dwellings, so they don't have access to their own garage with a charger. They have to charge in their residential facility, and a great majority of them do not have charging. So this is very much our focus area. We'll be happy to take the name of your residence where you live and contact the management team and the owners about it. But we have started deployment at several residential facilities already. They're private, so they're not publicly available, not visible in the public charging map on PlugShare or in the Flow map, but they exist, notably with PLK communities and a couple of other residential developments where we've already deployed, precisely for that reason, because sometimes folks won't even sign the rental contract unless there is EV charging provided in that building. So we say kudos to them. In terms of how with the proportion of chargers to parking spaces, how that works out. So we conduct very extensive site analytics to determine use case for a particular location, for a particular building, for a particular use case. There is no one size fits all. Some buildings have very limited number of parking. Some buildings have parking per resident or per apartment. So it really depends as to which residential development we're talking about, what their layout is, what the structure is. So we will do that kind of assessment. We also conduct surveys of residents so that we can find out more about who is living in a building, how many EV drivers are in a building, what would be feasible for that particular building from their standpoint in terms of deploying charging infrastructure. So there isn't a one size fits all. That is to say that we do assess on a case-by-case basis, but it's very much our priority area alongside with workplace charging and fleet charging, essentially where cars are parked the longest and where people kind of need charging the most. And those are level 2 chargers, again, primarily because in the residential environment, folks will charge overnight. They will simply leave their car to charge. So you can't expect somebody to get up at 4 in the morning to unplug their car and move it to another spot. This simply doesn't work for the use case. It may work in some situations, and certainly in California, for example, where the adoption is much higher. Oftentimes the EV charging spots are shared. So we would be working towards that model down the road. But right now, again, we don't have that many EV drivers. And so dedicated EV charging per parking spot is what we normally come across.
We have a planning group that's right now working on it at Hammond North, and we will be getting in touch with you, okay?
Please do. Partners@electrada.com.
I love it. We may not have a one-pager, but we have E-Vroom Zooms, and this is how we're making these connections. We have one final question. I'm going to turn it over to Joey. Is it Joey Bono? For this final question of the event. Go ahead, Joey.
Thanks, Carla. And it's actually Bono.
Bono, thank you.
You know, I'm going to switch up my question. I had a question for Brookes, but I want to switch this over to Joe. Joe, have you driven an electric car, or have you ridden in one? This is a two-part question.
I have ridden in an electric vehicle. I have not driven one.
Okay, and my second question is, when the Ford F-150 EV, or the Rivian, or the Lordstown, or that really beastly Bollinger comes on the market, would you buy one?
It's a good question. So I don't have a car at all. I pedal myself to work and home. So
you're a cyclist.
Yes. But if I bought a vehicle, I think it would very likely be an EV.
Great. The reason why I ask is you said that the Midwesterners are, tend to, and I know because I grew up in Kansas City, tend to be a little adverse to change initially. And the Midwesterners love their trucks. And right now, and this is kind of ties into my question with Brookes about the OEMs and the manufacturers, it seems like the reason why adoption rates aren't as high as they could be is because there's really no utility factor. And as these utility vehicles come online, it seems like Electrada's model is really going to benefit from this uptake in EV adoption rate, and folks that would otherwise want a truck but now have another option. So maybe Brookes could weigh in on that, and maybe Kevin as well.
Yeah, we're all around the table with the OEMs. So we have partnerships pretty much almost with every OEM on doing testing on the vehicles and on the network. So as new vehicles do release on the market, a lot of pieces from the firmware of the vehicle need to be updated to make sure that the charging stations work with those vehicles. So we have touch points with all OEMs. I think you're right, from especially like fleet adoption, right? With companies that require the larger vehicles, the pickup truck size. Once those hit the market, then you'll see a really, really big shift into further adoption. It's basically like you could look at an F-150 as a portable generator, right? And run off the battery instead of firing up your gas generator on site, right? Because the battery is significant from a size perspective. So the benefits that it brings is definitely significant.
Awesome. So this brings us to the end of our E-Vroom Zoom. I want to thank everybody for joining us, in particular, Kevin, Irina, Joe, and Brookes. Thank you so much. If you're new to E-Vroom Zooms, we will, thanks again for joining us for the first time. We hope it was a pleasant experience. In the chat box are links to our other events this week for EV Cincy Week, and our link to our website where you can find out additional information about what we're doing to help bring Cincinnati to a more EV friendly community. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful Tuesday. Take care. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carla. Great job. Thanks, Jennifer.
Great job, you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks all.
Bye.